Welcome to Nuked Radio. This is episode 91. Today is Tuesday, February the 5th, 2013. I'm your host, Christina Consolo, and this may just be the most important show that I've ever done. Please feel free to remix and share this video everywhere on social media so that the U.S. crew members who are not aware of this situation will be informed.
You're going to be hearing firsthand today what it was like to be in the aftermath of the Tohoku earthquake, the Fukushima reactor explosions, and the enormous devastation from the tsunami, and the extraordinary relief efforts that were provided by U.S. servicemen and women that were part of Operation Tomodachi. However, the devastation and death that surrounded these servicemen and women would have unforeseen lasting effects from the radioactive contamination that they unknowingly were exposed to. For those of us who have followed this nuclear disaster from day one, many of us have wondered whatever happened to the crew members of the USS Ronald Reagan, which was widely reported by mainstream media to have been contaminated and moved offshore. Videos were shared where the U.S. Navy sailors were swabbing the decks without protection, and there was behind-the-scenes video of sailors being measured by alarming Geiger counters. However, this was only a very small example of the number of servicemen and women that were exposed to weapons-grade plutonium and a host of other radioactive contaminants, not just for a few hours, but for 80 days during the extent of the relief operation. And it wasn't just crewmen of one ship. In addition to the U.S. Ronald Reagan, with its crew of 5,500, the group also included 4 destroyers, the Preble, McCampbell, Curtis Wilbur, and McCain, the USS Chancellorsville, the USS Essex, the USS Harper's Ferry, and Germantown, as well as several other support ships. The rescue operation was requested by the Japanese government and coordinated through the NRC, DoD, and DOE. It consisted not only of the ships and land-based truck drivers, helicopter crews, and carrier-based aircraft and helicopters, but personnel also from the Marines and Air Force. So far, 150 servicemen and women have developed a wide variety of illnesses, which may be from their exposure to radiation that they received during their mission. One of our guests today, Mike Seaburn, was the senior chief mechanic for the helicopter squadron based at Atsugi, and he's here to share his story. Also with us today is environmental law expert Paul Garner, who filed the lawsuit against TEPCO in San Diego Federal Court, and Carla, one of their sponsors. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Nice to be with you this morning. Thank you.
How close were you to the epicenter of the 9.0 earthquake?
We're about 100 miles off of where the center of the earthquake was. I had spent about 15 years in Japan, so I was pretty used to earthquakes. It was nothing new, but it was bigger than anything I'd ever experienced before.
When did you find out about the tsunami and the extent of the devastation? Did you guys hear the sirens from where you were?
No, there was no sirens. I was basically sitting at my desk at the aircraft hangar, and the entire world just started flipping around and turning upside down and shaking erratically. After all those years over there, one thing you know is once there's a big earthquake, there's going to be a tsunami, especially, in a place like Japan. So we kind of just braced for it. We didn't know exactly where it was going to hit, but we knew it was coming.
How long after the earthquake and tsunami did you find out about the nuke plants that were having problems?
Well, that wasn't initially told to us. The first thing, I think it went down on March 11th, and then on March 12th, we basically were pulled in by our commanding officer and told that we're on 24-hour standby notice and that we could leave at any time. And I believe that was, at first they said it was to do relief efforts, but then when the Fukushima plant started acting up, that's when they kind of took a different turn, and all of the fighter squadrons decided to evacuate down to Guam. and it was just us at ages 14 and our sister squadron at age of 51 that were going to go up to Misawa to take part in the relief efforts.
Did you know anything about nuclear energy before this accident?
Oh my gosh, no. I knew absolutely nothing about it.
So you were the chief mechanic for the helicopters at that base, but they decided to send you for some special training. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, once I had been selected for commission to become a limited duty officer, so they kind of realized that an instruction came out and that everybody in Atsugi basically needed to pinpoint a radiation decontamination officer to head up a division that would be in charge of measuring and decontaminating the aircraft equipment and personnel for beta and gamma radiation exposure. So they sent, when we came back to Atsugi, they sent me to a 2-day school, and I was basically told by the nukes that they were going to shove a 2-year nuclear course into 2 days. So that was the training I received.
So you learned about the Geiger counters at that time and measuring counts per minute?
That's correct. We learned about how to properly measure it, how to properly use our radiacs, how to test them, how to decide whether it's fixed or loose contamination, how to protect ourselves, how to decontaminate, and how to store the contaminated material.
What were some of the guidelines they gave you for protection? Like at what point were you guys supposed to wear masks and so forth dealing with equipment?
Well, that's a great question, because with the naval aviation, the nuclear radiation exposure has something that we had never dealt with in military aviation. Now, our ships, of course, most of them are nukes these days, but as for the aircraft, we had never flown into a radioactive plume before. So every single day, for the first month, every single day there was a brand new instruction that came out from Big Navy changing the parameters. And it was kind of learn as you go and learn on the fly. And, the next day they would figure out a kind of a safer way to do things or a better way to do things, and they would come out with another instruction. But eventually, it kind of all came down, and it was agreed upon that anything over 100 ccpm, which is corrected counts per minute, which is basically you take the counts per minute that it's reading, and then you subtract it from the air counts per minute, and that'll be your corrected counts per minute. So anything over 100, then you needed to wear gloves, double gloves. Anything over 500, you needed the Tyvek suit and double gloves. And anything over 5,000, you needed a respirator, goggles, Tyvek suit, and gloves.
What was the closest point that any of the ships or any of the servicemen or women that might have been on some of these planes or helicopters were to the Fukushima plant?
Well, they were flying in and out of Sendai, which is pretty close. I think, I don't want to give out a bad gouge, but I think it's no more than 20 miles away from Fukushima. And our guys were in and out of Sendai 10 times a day.
And wasn't there a carrier that was right very close to the plant? Maybe Paul knows that.
Yes, I saw Facebook pictures taken from the USS Ronald Reagan, which showed that it was very close to the shore. In fact, one of our clients said that they were within 2 miles of the nuclear power plant, and they couldn't see the water. It was so full of debris. There was a whole house floating by, cars, all kinds of debris surrounding the USS Ronald Reagan, and of course now we know that it was all radioactive.
Were they that close when Reactor 3 exploded?
Well, you saw the picture on ABC News. It aired over there. It didn't air in this country except on ABC News. And they showed that the Reagan had sailed through a nuclear plume. But they were basically in and out. They had limited measuring devices on board the Reagan, but they would sail in, sail out. But the the stream of material was so diffuse and airborne that it just carried seemed to be carrying in the direction they were sailing in. And I'll just say to you that they got a very large dose. And the people who are in the know understand that most of the nuclear radioactive material ended up in the water. It ended up in the sea, exactly where the 7th Fleet was operating. Unbeknownst to them, it was much worse than they were told by the TEPCO people through the Japanese government. And basically, they couldn't see it until it was too late. And then they realized what they were dealing with, and rather than cut and run, they continued to deliver humanitarian supplies to the affected people of Fukushima Prefecture and others who, were without, the basic necessities of life. In March, it was very cold over there. And in fact, many of our clients were on the flight deck of the USS Ronald Reagan, where the helos would come back in and the jets would come back in, and they had to try to decontaminate them as best they could with soap and water and radioactive water. They couldn't use the water aboard the ship because it was radioactive. They couldn't drink the water. Air became contaminated. They had to batten down the hatches after that, what we saw at reactor below. And it took a while for Captain Burke to get all of the equipment back on board, scrub it up, batten down the hatches, and get out of there. But as you said before, they were sailing around in this for quite some time.
We were all under the impression from what we saw in the news here that they were just in and out, but they were going on missions, some of the fleet, like 30 times a day was what I saw, involving 17 tons of food, water, and blankets to people every day.
Yes, well, you can imagine in Fukushima Prefecture alone, there were 2 million people, children, women, and it was devastating for them. The tsunami was the second punch. The first punch was the earthquake, which was a 9.0, the 5th largest earthquake in recorded history. So that was followed several minutes later, probably 30, 40 minutes later, by the tsunami. And then that was followed by the release of nuclear material. But the nuclear material had already released within the power plant after the earthquake. That's important. Workers saw cracks in the piping. In the reactor, they saw venting steam coming in there. And nobody told the 7th Fleet. They just said, hey, we got it all under control. I heard from one of the Fukushima 50 last Thursday who was there trying to deal with the situation. And he said in the control room, they didn't know the control room was contaminated. Yet they had one of these devices, that would they'd send in there, with a camera and everything to scope things out. It was total devastation within there. If you can only imagine what the people in the 7th Fleet had no idea of, is that this 20-meter, 100-mile-per-hour tsunami slammed into the power plant and pretty much whipped through the whole plant and knocked out the only source of power, external power to the power plant, which would feed the cooling system. Now, in their wisdom, they had several problems with this power plant in the past. It was an accident waiting to happen. It was built on a fault line. And our case is filed in San Diego Federal Court, and you can check it out on the court website. It's 12 CV, 12 Civil 3032. And you can read the complaint and all the references in there, and it pretty well details the fact that vital information was kept from these rescuers, these first responders who went in there to deliver humanitarian aid. And had they known, I think Nick wouldn't be sitting here with you today describing what he went through, and you haven't even heard what he's got as a result or what his 10-year-old son suffered from. Maybe we should hear about that.
Sure. Mike, do you want to share it with us?
I heard you kind of say on the intro that it didn't just last for a few days, it lasted for 80 days. But to be honest with you, we were still dealing with the radiation contamination of the aircraft and the equipment up until the end of this last year. So, yeah, so about 3 months ago, these aircraft were still radiated.
Did you say till the end of this last year?
Yeah, so about 3 months ago, these aircraft were still radiated.
Where were they still in Japan, or are they back on this side of the Pacific?
Well, they were stationed in Japan. They're still there, but they're actually coming to San Diego next month. The squadron is transitioning and changing platforms from over in Atsugi and coming back over here to San Diego, and then another squadron is taking their place over in Japan. So that was the big push to get those aircraft cleaned of radiation before they were able to come back over to U.S. soil.
Do you know anything about that process? How are they decontaminating them successfully?
Yeah, I was actually in charge of the process. And, the big issue we ran into, like I said, it was kind of a crapshoot, and everybody was kind of shooting from the hip on the safe and proper way to do these things. And what we would notice was the pretty lengthy instruction came out. Okay, when an aircraft comes back from a flight, take readings with your radiac on these 7 different positions on the outside of the aircraft, on both sides. And if you find contamination over a certain point, go ahead and try to decontaminate it. If it's under a certain point, then don't worry about it for right now. And so we would kind of do that. And, we would drop the levels down a little bit. And then about 6 months later, another instruction comes out, or we have to do kind of routine maintenance to change out internal parts with the engine. And, our level of height security has fallen a little bit because we think these aircraft are a little bit cleaner now. So they haven't been in the plume for about a year, and we're just trying to do some routine maintenance. The levels are low enough to where we can just use gloves. And then all of a sudden we pull out these internal parts, and these things are rated at, 10, 15,000 ccpm, and we think that they're clean. And, yeah, and these guys are running around with nothing but gloves on, trying to pull these parts out, and then they find out that this thing is 5 times the limit of what you would be wearing with respirators.
15,000 CPM, was that the highest number you've seen on any piece of equipment?
No, 60,000 was the highest I saw. And Atsugi Base was kind of used as the storage facility for all of the contaminated equipment that the Army, the Marine Corps, and the Navy was using. So we had our wash plant down there. And after every flight, you had to go wash the aircraft. And to decontaminate, you had to wash the aircraft. And, everything had to be washed. But this water can't just run into the ground because it's radiated. So they had to be stored in these separate bladders and, ran through hazmat and the environmental guys. And the Army, we were down there waiting for the opportunity to wash one of our aircraft, and the Army pulled out a 60,000 ccpm radiator out of one of their helicopters. And it was absolutely crazy circumstance. The nuclear guys just kind of went nuts and, deep sunk this thing into a barrel of water and other chemicals, and then put a huge barrier around it, police line, do not cross. And, radiation actually feeds itself, and if you get radiation that high, it becomes its own source of power and energy. And it won't go away. Storing in a container is not going to do anything, so it'll actually feed, and it will grow. And so every day these readings around the area have to be taken. Okay, at this point, 5 feet from that barrel, we're reading, 750 ccpm, and then, and you just have to continue to monitor that. Now, from the hundreds of thousands of gallons of water that were collected, I have no idea what happened to it, but it's there somewhere. along with all of the contaminated Tyvek suits, gloves, equipment, stuff like that. But what we noticed when we went back to Atsugi, and the reason we left Misawa to go back to Atsugi wasn't because it was safe, it's because we could no longer reach the areas of Sendai and Fukushima because the snow had gotten so bad, a blizzard had moved in, and we could no longer make it over the mountains because of the weather. So we actually went back to Atsugi and worked out of there. And we were told at any point we could, because we're watching this nuclear plant, we have absolutely no idea what's going on. We're hearing from the Japanese government or the Japanese company that everything's fine, it's under control. But, we're listening to Fox News and CNN and all these other places that are saying the exact opposite. And the Navy is kind of trying to figure out which way to go with it. And we were told, before you left, put your name and ID and everything, or your name and phone number in your dashboard of your car because you're probably not going to get back. Atsugi was basically a 50-50 shot of whether that base is going to be shut down indefinitely. And with the information we received, they had a not a mandatory evacuation, but they had a voluntary evacuation for all family members. But with the misinformation that was received from the Tenko company, a lot of people, including myself, decided not to move their family, especially with all the Japanese, there's a lot of guys married to Japanese women over there. And, of course, the Japanese don't want to move because, their family's there and that's their home. So many of them stayed, including mine, and, had medical issues develop. And, we're taking background readings.
Explain to Christine what medical issues, like your son has had.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that you had a son that was living in Japan with you at the base.
Yes, I did. My son, he went on a vomiting fit of about 3 months long. And it was the only thing wrong with him. But every day he would go to school, and he would start throwing up uncontrollably, and they would send him home. But after that, he would be fine. And the next day, he'd go to school, and he would throw up, and they would send him home. And he missed a month of school because of that. And I basically had to make a deal with the teachers saying, hey, other than his uncontrollable vomiting, he's fine. Can you please, let him raise his hand and let him be excused to go to the bathroom so he can come back and not, get held back in grade because he's missed too much school. He would vomit 15 to 20 times a day, and nobody could figure out what was wrong. The Navy medicine couldn't figure out what it was, and we actually took him out of town where he had the Japanese health care. And they did, CAT scans, they did MRIs, they were checking him for brain tumors and absolutely everything, and they came up empty-handed, and they could not figure out what it was. And he's still not as bad by any, but nothing to the degree of what he felt from, March till about August.
Like, that's something I kind of wanted to get into with you also, because so many of us have been experiencing symptoms on this side of the Pacific. And there's a few things that are kind of hallmarks of radiation exposure symptom-wise. Something that was reported among military members who witnessed atomic bomb tests in the 60s was a metallic taste in their mouth, which is actually because you're tasting fission, which can also happen without radiation exposure. Like if you have a certain types of medical tests, even using like a vegetable dye, but it's not something that people normally experience from anything in their environment. Do you recall ever noticing that, or anybody that you knew?
I had heard people talk about that. I never experienced the metallic taste in my mouth, no. I did experience the nausea, headaches. I would wake up in the morning with not a bloody nose, but almost like dry blood inside my nose. But those actually went away after a while. It was, I think, part of the immediate acute exposure to where those symptoms came from. Now, honestly, it's the long-term effects that kind of worry me, and it's, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. What's going to happen to me is kind of my main concern,
It was widely reported from residents in the Pacific Northwest in the weeks following the accident that people were complaining of this metallic taste. In Spokane and Portland, Chris Starosa from Simon Fraser University reported that 10 million particles per liter of iodine-131 were measured in rain in Vancouver and double that in San Francisco. So, I mean, that's a long distance from the reactors.
When?
I will send you that article when we get off air today.
When did they measure that, Christine?
I believe it was in the first 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, good, because your listeners should know as we speak that the radiation is still coming over because the TEPCO people who run the power plant don't know what to do with the waste, and they're burning it and concentrating it. And what they're burning is being released into the atmosphere, and it's being carried through the jet stream. And what they're not burning, they're dumping into the ocean, and it was reported that one of their contractors actually dumped it into a potable water source, a river, not too far from there that people depend upon. So they have 25 million tons of radioactive material, and they've only eliminated maybe 3% of it. So if it's the beat goes on and business as usual, and people don't raise up and say enough, we're in for what Senator Wyden of Oregon went over there soon afterward on a fact-finding mission. And he came back and he was quoted as saying that what we have here is a disaster of biblical proportions. And he was going to write a letter to Secretary Chu, who was the Energy Secretary, and Secretary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at that time, who, wanted to make sure that we responded to this and tell them, look, you got to do whatever is possible to help the Japanese deal with this situation. And by way of explanation, okay, the case I filed is Cooper against TEPCO. We're suing the Tokyo Electric Power Company that was responsible for operating the power plant, for maintaining a dangerous instrumentality, and permitting the release of this nuclear material, as you described, plutonium, cesium. They have cesium in the water supply in Tokyo right now. And the people there are really in a rough spot. The Fukushima prefecture was known for its peaches throughout the world. Forget about that. They have their products removed from advertisements, from catalogs. They can't sell anything. The fishermen from Fukushima prefecture do not offload their boats there. They take them to other prefectures. The prefecture is like a state. So can you imagine you go from the Gulf where you got poison in the water and you offload it somewhere distant from there and you say, hey, the fish is fine. Guess what? They're not. They're not. It's gotten into the food chain. It's gotten into our air supply. And Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont urged the Department of Defense to establish a registry, and the doctor in charge of the Veterans Administration welfare, within days of March 11th, 2011, urged that the registry be created to track the 70,000 military personnel and support personnel and their families who were exposed here. And they started this. Christine, 70,000 and support people, 70,000. And they evacuated many of them out of there. But here's the thing. The DOD on their website had this Operation Tomodachi registry, which they said was going to be completed by the end of last year. At a meeting on Thursday in Scottsdale, Arizona, I asked Dr. Stephen Rademacher, who's with the Air Force, who was flown there by the DOD, will that registry include all of the people in the 7th Fleet who are on the vessels that you described? And he said yes. And the very next day, I'm on my way back to California, I learned that they decided to abandon the registry. after these experts came to this meeting and said it's a lot easier to track people prospectively. You know where they were. You know what doses they may have been exposed to. You can get their medical records and you can follow them 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future and make sure that they're getting proper care. And the Defense Department has abandoned that. They've let these people are left with no recourse except through this non-governmental lawsuit that we filed, which we're going to include all 70,000 in and toll the statute of limitations by March 11th of this year. It's 2 years since this has happened. And if the government is broke and they can't afford to help those who they train and send on a $4 billion vessel, the USS Reagan. And listen, I saw the Reagan last year. It's up in Bremerton, Washington in dry dock. It's been there for a year. They cannot get the radiation out of it. And it's come to my attention that some of the workers up there are experiencing symptoms just by reason of the fact that they had to work on the ship that's there. So it's not going to go away. And I would share with your listeners the fact that it's come to my attention. They can check this out on Bloomberg News, January 24th of this year. Former TEPCO chairman said question in Fukushima legal probe. Suneisha Katsumata, who served as chairman of the power company known as TEPCO until June of 2012, was interviewed by investigators probing alleged professional negligence resulting in deaths and injuries connected to the accident. Kyoto reported today. That's their news agency. So by June, they expect to release the results of their investigation. I suggest don't hold your breath, because the government of Japan campaigned, the present government of Japan campaigned on the promise to restart all 50 nuclear reactors throughout Japan. There are only 2 in operation today. They want to start this Fukushima reactor plant, although 3 of the reactors have melted down, and they use seawater in order to cool them and cool the spent fuel rods and let the seawater run back into the ocean. But guess what? You don't have to be a rocket scientist or an engineer to know that if you pour salt water on metal, it's going to corrode. This reactor is over 25 years old. It's reached its life expectancy, as have all of the others, the GE reactors and Toshiba-maintained reactors throughout Japan. They don't want to take them out of service because they want to keep using them to boil water, to generate steam, to make power. And they're going to put them back online, and we're all in trouble. And not only that, they have a deal in the works where they want to buy new reactors to put in there. They don't have enough. They don't have enough of them. So understand this. Japan, there isn't a place that isn't on a fault line there. And they're right now, the TEPCO people are buying coal. They're buying oil in order to generate power. It's too expensive for them. It's all about money, money, money. Instead of encasing the spent fuel rods that they stored on the upper deck at the power plant, they had to call in fire engines to hose them down to keep them from basically melting down and releasing more plutonium, even though the fuel rods are quote-unquote spent. Just like Mike described, the radiation keeps coming, keeps coming. All they can do is encase them in cement. It costs $1 million per rod, and they don't want to spend the money. And like former Mayor Ed Koch of New York said, piggy, piggy, piggy. I don't know that there's going to be much change unless it occurs from the bottom up, because from the top down, we have a situation where our government, just as the government of Japan, is captured by an industry that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And We're not fighting to shut down all nuclear power plants. That's not our goal. But for God's sakes, if you're going to operate something, do it in a reasonably safe manner. If you have problems, realize you have problems and address those problems. I asked the representative of TEPCO, who they sent to this conference over in Scottsdale. He was one of the Fukushima 50 who was sent in there. They sent him in. It was like a story that you'd hear from a victim, showing slides of the devastation and everything, and saying, I don't know if I was going to live because the radiation levels were so high in there. So they send in another rescuer, so to speak, and they don't expose their higher-ups who run the show, who they were supposed to produce from their office on L Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., where they maintain a site where they lobby the Hill, and they have an office in London, England, a big international company, and it's run by people who really don't care except about the bottom line. Now, since June, Christine, since June of last year, the government of Japan has become its major shareholder. They pumped in billions of dollars of yen into the company, and they said that the government would stand by their losses, stand behind them. That's all we're asking them to do here for these people who are affected. Now I have over 150 people who are young, who had no problems before, who were like in their early 20s, who were cleared to operate billion-dollar equipment and be our first responders and protect us from the bad guys. They got leukemias. They have growths. They're undergoing surgery to remove lesions in their brain. A couple of them have had them and have lost the sight in their eye. One guy has testicular cancer. He was aboard the Reagan. He's 21. He had one of his testicles removed already. And you know what their talking points are? The TEPCO people and those in power. It's all low-level radiation. Nothing to worry about. It's too little to worry about. You don't teach us. I say, if they get away with this, then, what the heck did we fight Watergate for? What the heck did we, what happened to our Navy? What happened to our Navy? It's like we had a Navy under JFK, PT-109. He swam to protect his crew, take care of his crew. I'm not sure that, we're going in the right direction. What I do know is this, from speaking to everybody that I've spoken to who was there on the scene, this was a disaster. They weren't trained to deal with it. They're like the firemen rushing in, responding to a disaster there to help the people. And if we're going to turn our backs on them, I just say, like we say in New York sometimes, forget about it. There's no hope for us if we can't take care of the people who take care of us. And come on, everybody watches the Super Bowl. You can donate $10 to help our troops. You can help our troops. I want these TEPCO people to help our troops. I have pleaded with them. I have asked their lawyer, please help us. We have people who are dying. We have people who need medical care, and the VA is not equipped to deal with it. One woman who was over there, stationed over there and left, she's already had a bone marrow transplant at the NIH in Maryland. Thank God she got it there. That's the best of the best. I got a couple of clients who are in Florida. Jamie Lee Plym is bleeding incessantly. She never had a problem before. She's a young woman. And her fiance, he's weak as can be. And they're worried. They're worried. They don't know what's going to happen to them. And nobody who they work for is tracking them. And you can bet that TEPCO people have their hands full over there. So just in conclusion, Mike already touched upon this. The long-term effects are really the unknown question here. But the short-term effects are clear. And I have to really bite my tongue when the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil people say that it was all low-level radiation, and it's just an aberration that now you have 150 people and growing every day who've got issues. One final point. We heard from a professor who went over there on a 10-day fact-finding mission, and he reported that within the first 30 days, over 500 medical doctors and support people left Japan. So they have a real vacuum in terms of getting treatment. There were doctors who actually refused to treat anyone who came out of Fukushima province. And there's been Mike touched upon, they put the radioactive radiator in water and soap and water. Okay, what they're doing over there now in Fukushima is not much. But in the adjacent province where they get their persimmons from, they're power washing the bark of the trees to try to get the radiation out. But they don't know how to get the radiation out of the forests. And the persimmons are not sweet. They're sour. They're also scraping up what they call low-level contaminated soil, and they're putting it in blue bags, and they're piling it up in parks, in schoolyards, at public buildings. And the government has asked other prefectures, will you take this low-level contaminated soil and bury it? They say it's harmless. Guess what? Nobody wants it. No one wants it. And so they got a real dilemma. And the poor kids from Fukushima, they're now known as the Fukushima fatties.
Because they're all getting diabetes, and 54% of children age 11 to 15 have thyroid nodules and cysts.
There you go. So, and they want to attribute it to the fact that it was wintertime, and they were staying in and playing their video games and watching TV, and thank God they were indoors. It wasn't like Chernobyl. Hey, guess what? Chernobyl happened over land, and what we learned from Chernobyl, we're seeing reappear in these victims of Fukushima today. So tell me another story if you say, oh, this is not as bad as Chernobyl, this is nowhere as bad, it's all low level, and we don't have to worry. It's mind-boggling to me that people can take this ostrich technique when people around them are dropping like flies, and they just, go on with business as usual. They set up a fund over, Terkena says they set up a fund to try to, to help their people over there. I've received correspondence and spoken with people who are over there, and they're crying out for help. They're saying, Paul Garner, won't you come here and sue them over here for us? We're really hurting. First of all, you should understand this. Japan's culture, they're very attuned to radiation since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're probably more concerned about it than any other country around, okay? But they had a triple whammy here, as I described before, and in their planning, they planned for each of the three eventualities, the earthquake, the tsunami, and the release of radiation, but not all three at once. And that makes a difference. So they're regionally now, in the New York Times, it was reported last Friday that the nuclear industry in Japan is trying to enact more safeguards. One of the safeguards they're recommending is that they have more than one power source for the nuclear power plant, so that, for example, here when the tsunami knocked out the tower that had the power source, they would have a backup power source. Well, see, I asked the Representative Tepco. I couldn't resist, even though he was low level, because the title of our get-together was Lessons We Have Learned Since Fukushima, almost 2 years down the road. So I asked him, perhaps, did you learn that you should not place the backup generators next to the seawall such that they would be inundated by the tsunami and rendered useless, and you would only have one generator left? Come on. Everybody knows if you lose the power and if you don't have a generator, you don't have any source of powering equipment, pumps, cooling systems, everything. So he says, after the interpreter and a pregnant pause, he says, yes, it would have been better to locate the backup generators on the hillside because it's built on the side of a mountain, okay, and it goes down to the sea. But he says, then we would have to have an independent water source in order to cool the reactors if the power shut down. Well, they have those at other reactors. You know, they have them. And you know, there's a gentleman in Japan who's been attending all these hearings that they have on what changes they should make. And he says it's business as usual. It's the same people who are in charge, the same people in the government who campaigned on restarting the power plant. They don't really care, it seems to us. And he says it's gotten down to the low levels within the government. So what we learned was just south of the power plant, they have J Village. And this is an assembly place where they fly in all the dignitaries. They had the TEPCO, all the people who were making decisions in the nuclear industry there on how they should deal with things. So can you imagine, you know, the horse is out of the barn, and they're letting the person who let the horse out of the barn fix things.
They brought in a new spin doctor named Barbara Judge. This was reported by Catriona Davies today on CNN. She is a 66-year-old lawyer and businesswoman with dual British and American citizenship and has been called in by TEPCO to help relaunch Japan's nuclear power program. She visited Fukushima on Saturday and said that she was full of hope and enthusiasm, not despair. She was amazed at how much work had been done to clear up the site and had high aspirations to make the site the safest in the world. You brought up an important point about Senator Wyden, because it took him 14 months to go over there and see what was going on to begin with. And when he came back, you know, his letter made the press. Nothing has really been done since that time. That was in April of 2012 that he came back from that trip and sounded the alarm. All they've done is remove 2 rods from the spent fuel pool, and they started to assemble what I call the monkey bars over reactor 4 to help get the rest of the fuel out. We know that there were several fires in that pool, that the integrity of the cladding and the materials of those rods is going to be disrupted from those fires. They're not going to be able to just pull them out like the first 2. And there's 1,565 fuel assemblies. So, I mean, that's still one of the most important aspects of what's going on over there is the reactor 4 situation. The building is still leaning. The seismicity of the building has been rated at a 0. So even a small earthquake could make it fall. And where are the international experts?
Shunned, pushed to the side, like they want to paint them as being crazies who are lunatic fringe, who are alarmists, like global warming alarmists. You know, yeah, come on, it's not so bad. It's all low level. Christopher Busby, he's over in England. He's been following nuclear problems and following this situation for a long time. At this conference, the people who are running it, it's clear to me, are touched by the nuclear industry. They wanted to besmirch him because he's trying to help the people in Japan. He came out with a substance called Busby 1, which has a lot of good things in it that might actually chelate some of the radiation out of the kids. And they got on him because they got to sell it over the internet, and they're shipping and handling. It's a long way to Japan. But at least he's trying to do something. These guys who are like, I spoke to this Dr. Becker. He went over there on a fact-finding mission. He was Obama's emissary to go over there. He's a guy who responds to all these big disaster scenes and everything. So he went over there and he took pictures, he took photographs, he wrote a paper on it about what he observed over there. He published pictures. One of the pictures we saw were people sitting in their cars. I mean, these 2 women were dead sitting in their car. It was taken from the back, thank God. But they were just 2 out of hundreds. who were sitting in traffic jams trying to get away from the earthquake when the tsunami hit, and they just drowned in their cars. And they have other people walking around, civil service people walking around with push rods to poke into the silt to find bodies, to locate the bodies. We saw pictures like 2 kilometers inland, just boats, no houses, everything gone, completely gone. So this is not going to go away. And this expert, I would like to ask this expert, if I have the opportunity, it's going to be the safest in the world. What are you going to do with the 25 million pounds? Try to wrap your head around this, okay? An elephant's 2,000 pounds, 25 million pounds. So what do you have? Over 12 million elephants? Where are you going to put them? Where do they go? You know, where do they? None of the places in Japan want it. China doesn't want it. You know, the Japanese wanted to take over some provinces from China to outlying areas to deal with their population explosion in China. Said, no, you know, that's not going to happen. So here we are. We have, incidentally, in the case that we have filed, Cooper against TEPCO in the Southern District. TEPCO has lawyered up. They hired a lawyer out of L.A., Greg Stone, and he's well-versed in handling big, cases on behalf of polluters. He represented a tobacco company that poisoned the people's lungs in California. So they got people who are experts, and they have lots of money to spend, and it's like David against Goliath. And we started out with 9 people, including Kim Deiseking, who was on the Reagan, and she was pregnant at the time and didn't know it. And her fetus, her baby, is now a couple of years old, doesn't speak. I'm not an expert, but, the experts say the fetus takes up most of the radiation more than the mother does. Then I've got, people who are bleeding from their behinds, who have sores all over their bodies. One of my clients was in charge of keeping the log aboard the USS Reagan. Whenever the device went off, he would record. He said, Paul, it was going off constantly. We would sail in, we would sail out. I invite your readers to go on the internet and check out Energy News. There are some good articles on there and some interesting references that try to point out the truth. And Christine, you asked about international scientists. They're contacting us. They're contacting us. They want to help us. Former nuclear experts, whistleblowers from 3 Mile Island, people who are familiar with Chernobyl, who've studied it for years, and they're not captured by the industry, and they're not going to make beaucoup dollars by coming out with some, whitewashing. I'll say, it'll be another Warren report. You know what I mean? We don't need that. We need the truth. We need it now. And my people, I started out with this small group only. I wasn't seeking to represent hundreds. That wasn't our mission. We wanted to investigate and find out from witnesses who were there and who knew what was happening. And the floodgates have opened. They're all climbing on board. There's no help offered to them. Much as I'd like to, the VA is not equipped to deal with these issues. And the familiar story I hear over and over again from those who are out or those who are in, who got treated at the VA, if they or their wives happen to mention to the doctor, I was at Operation Tomodachi, Operation Friends, off Fukushima, and I haven't felt these symptoms before. Now I got them. Do you think it's related? I'm not sure. I don't know. We'll get back to you on that.
How can people contact you if they're just learning about this case and maybe they were serving in the military in that capacity and maybe experiencing symptoms now?
We're trying to set up a website so that people can go to that, and it's in progress. but it's taking a little time. But in the meantime, they can email me, PCG, my initials PCG, at garnerlaw.com, or my associate, Daryl J. Brooks, that's DARYL, the initial J, BROOKS, at roadrunner.com, or they can call me at 760-600-0081, and we'll get them involved in the study. What we are doing is we're gathering the medical records that the DOD said they were going to do, and we're performing blood testing on the people who haven't had blood tests in a long time, so we can have a differential and find out, perhaps what's going on. It's not normal to have a white blood count of 40,000. And it's not normal when you're a young guy to pass out at work and have to be taken to the hospital.
We're getting to the end of the show. Best of luck to you, Paul, and to you, Mike. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for educating people. All we want to do is let them know what's going on. Nobody seems to be aware of this situation, and it's time that they became aware. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, and we'll share this information far and wide. We'll put all your contact information underneath the video when it gets uploaded to YouTube. Best of luck, and feel free to come on anytime if you want to update us on the situation.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Share love, caring, and concern for your fellow man, and stay safe, everyone.
がんになりませんっていうのを報奨できますか？
ごめんなさい。
ごめんなさいは足りない。はっきり言ってください。
言えない。確率論だから。絶対ということは誰も言えない。絶対安心ということは誰も言えない。しかし、安心してくださいとお願いできる。ここは大事です。命令もできなければ 100% いう科学はありません。必ずエラーが起こります。